we might be looking for that external validation or sort of applause or appreciation when something is off-centered. And can we, before we go looking for that, can we check in and see if it's something that we're missing or needing to offer ourselves before we start looking for it externally?
So before we get into today's episode, should you be a business owner juggling multiple roles and hungry to grow your dream business, but you're lacking the time and support? Trust me, we've all been there. Then this is a little reminder to head on over to thestream.co.za for your free resources and to find out more about our exclusive membership that launches once a year. Let's get back into this episode. Welcome to today's episode where I chat to counsellor Sharmon from Mumwell about sacrifices for your partner's career. Now, whether you've made the sacrifices for your partner or the other way around, this is a really, really meaningful conversation. And if you enjoy it, please do share it with your friends and loved ones. I pretty much feel like I'm inviting you to my own personal therapy session. So sit back and enjoy our conversation.
I think we can get started, but I know we're going to have this more as a conversation than an interview style episode. But I think just for clarity and for anyone that's tuning in, can you maybe from your perspective describe or define sacrifices within the context of today's topic, which is sacrifices for your partner's career?
Absolutely. I think when I think of sacrifice, I have this visualization of sort of, a slaughtered sheep or something. And there's a really, there can be quite a negative connotation to sacrifice. And sacrifice, really, if we go to our definition, looking at offering something up as an act of worship. Which I think doesn't have the healthiest notion when we're looking at our romantic relationships and partnerships. So I think for the purpose of our topic, looking more at postponing or adapting our immediate preferences for the benefit of our relationship. So it's not giving up on something or sort of offering something over, but rather adapting to hopefully have more positive or benefits in our relationship.
Yes, and sort of that long-term, the sacrifices you make now for the long-term benefit or gain. I know we're going to chat more about it, but if I just look at and obviously I chose this topic because it's so fitting to my life that I've just recently, within the past 2 months, moved from family and friends up to Potchefstroom, where we have no one here. Or know no one. Now we at least do. We've started to connect and make some friends. But yeah, that was a massive, it's such a hard word to, like you say, it's got a negative connotation saying sacrifice, because we are here because of my husband's career and an amazing opportunity that he was given. But at the same time, it's for us in the long run. And I think I'm quite hard-headed and quite stubborn based off of my past sort of relationships and a younger Marisa and who was a lot more submissive. Still, unfortunately, very much a people's pleaser that I'm constantly working on, and I've still got codependent habits. But if I look at my past relationship versus now, when this opportunity arose, I almost immediately went into like business partnership mode with Rocco. So maybe I should talk about the situation of how it unfolded and how I feel up until this point that it was a joint decision, as much as it sounds like it's chasing his career. But basically what happened was, last year, he works within the liquor industry, which is a topic on its own to divulge in. But He's very much within that hierarchy system of climbing the corporate ladder, worked with the company for the past 10 years, and he's got a certain goal. And what they often do in order for employees to get more exposure in different regions and understand different markets is they have to be adaptable. So they have to be able to move and be able to relocate with whether they're on their own or with their families in order to climb the ladder, in order to get promotions and get the good jobs at the end of the day. Otherwise, you sort of just stagnate. And Rocco, being the super ambitious person that he is, he also was in a comfortable situation when we were back in Cape Town, but it was just too comfortable, and he could have stayed within the position, but it meant that long term, when we do start our family and we do have kids and he has to step in a bit, because we've spoken about who takes that role, he has to step in a bit more from a financial perspective, then we would be in a different situation, not as comfortable. So anyways, this opportunity came about, and before the Potch offer came, there was quite a couple of Joburg offers, and that's where, in fact, it was just before we got married, there was a Joburg offer, and we'd only been in Cape Town for a year, because prior to that we were in Vanderbijlpark, as you know, again for Rocco's career. And we just relocated to Cape Town. In fact, he then took a sacrifice of going for a lateral move to move back to Cape Town. So stagnated within the same position for 3 years, as opposed to climbing up, just so that we could be close to family and back to Cape Town. Back in Cape Town. So we were there, and then Joburg offers came about. It was just before our wedding, and I think emotionally I was just not there to be able to manage it. So he came home stressed out, not knowing how he's going to approach it, because he's in a pickle. He wants to, advance in his career. He wants to look out for us as a family in the future, but he knows how sad I'll be to be moving away from family and friends. And also, yes, and then basically that I just couldn't handle. I was crying, and my position work-wise and working for myself, I just didn't feel comfortable. So anyways, that passed, and the work basically said to him, these offers are going to stop coming if you keep rejecting them. You're going to stop getting these opportunities. And by the time that the Porch offer came about, I was in a total different mindset. We'd been married for almost 6 months. My career, work-wise, I'd gotten the new startup into a very more comfortable position. So mentally and work-wise, I was in a much better space. And he came home and he was like, how am I going to reject this offer? Like, why would we want to go sit in Potch? And I literally he first phoned me, then he came home, and I sat him down, and I took a total different approach. I showed him the pros and okay, obviously we knew the cons. I didn't have to show him that, and being away from everyone, etc. Showed him the pros, told him this is what the negotiations that we have to go through, both him and I, and him and his company for the contract. And thinking back, I'm pretty proud of myself, because in my previous relationship at 27, I did not take this approach at all. It was like, I'll move anywhere for love. I don't care about my happiness comes second. And basically it became like this negotiation, sat down, and I even showed him Property 24. I was like, yes, some houses, this is where we can stay in Potch. So it already painted this picture, and I took this total different approach, and he almost felt like this weight was lifted off his shoulders. And there were a few things in our relationship negotiation. I don't know, I don't want it to sound too negative. It wasn't like there was too much compromise there. And then that's when we made the call. And so by the time we moved up here, we were both so excited for new adventure, not knowing anyone, because at the end of the day, this sacrifice, and it's so hard thinking of being away from parents who are getting older, family and friends, and what you're missing out on. But if we focus on the good things, it's such an awesome chapter in our book that one day, eventually, when we are hopefully back in Cape Town, we can look back and talk about these stories and talk about our total different life. It almost pauses life for a little bit. It's not like just the mundane rat race that we were living in. Sorry, that was a mouthful.
No, absolutely. And I think that is, your experience and how you've described the growth you've made internally and taking on this decision from a different perspective. I think that highlights the positive that can come from sacrifice, sort of the growth, the unity, the cohesion, and the trust. That you can trust yourself to make this decision as healthy as possible. You trust your partner in walking this road with you. And I think that's such sort of integral parts of a healthy relationship that can be seen in sacrifice when it's positive.
Totally. It's definitely an age thing. I can promise you that. Yeah, even, and it's so strange because 6 months prior to this, sit down and negotiation of are we moving to Podge, I had a total different attitude, and I didn't have capacity. I didn't have emotional capacity to think about moving away from loved ones. And yeah, it's interesting how it can change, but obviously I know that you don't want to have it, a couple of years down the line, build into resentment. So I don't know how would you give advice on anyone when making a decision like this? Is it, if I look back at age 27 I was much younger. I was 23 when I moved with my previous partner to London, to the UK. We came back for a stint for his work, then went back there. And the move back there was just like, okay, cool, I love you, I'll go. And it was an instant decision of put my whatever I'm feeling within, despite going to, I think it was, what was I seeing? Kinesiologist who was like, your body doesn't want to go to the UK. I was like, I'm going. That really backfired because obviously that relationship didn't last. But anyways, then it was an impulsive, yes, I'll go, versus now thinking, processing, how's it going to benefit us as a whole? How's it going to benefit me? And once I make the decision, I know I cannot build up that resentment because it's just as much my decision as it was Rocco's decision. So I think what advice can you give to others out there who may be in a similar situation?
Yeah. I think we could spend hours on sort of the avoiding climbing the resentimeter, because I think that does happen. So many different parts there. I think one is the communication, and I think when we sort of look at communication rather than expectation, and when there's an expectation that this opportunity's come up, you will do this for me, we're more likely to get into that resentment space when there's an expectation and less communication. And I think you've already sort of highlighted so many of those things in looking at, how can this benefit us? And when we look at sacrifices, what am I doing for you? We can already hear that resentful tone of, I did all of this for you, I moved for you, but when it comes from what are we doing for us? How can this benefit us? And really reframing the for you, for me to a for us, not negating our own personal needs, but incorporating sort of as a partnership, how can this be beneficial to the both of us? I think a piece in there, if we make these sacrifices without considering sort of the joy or the happiness, if we're in a space of regret, if we're in a space of unhappiness or isolation or being miserable, we're more likely going to resent the situation. So I think to really climb into the happiness and the joy in doing this, what great things could happen for us, or in doing this, what can I incorporate into my life that will bring me happiness? What are some of my non-negotiables? So if we pause some of my intended preferences and we go for this, what kind of things would I need to incorporate into this move, for example, relocating, or into this change to really be the best version of myself and find my purpose in a change that's benefiting you? I'm not sure if that sort of makes sense, but that could look different for everyone. Maybe part of the non-negotiables are, I would like to travel home every month to see my family, or maybe it's I would like to take on a new hobby. Maybe it's it could be anything, but really carving out what can I benefit from this, because it's not about one benefiting, but how could we both benefit.
Gosh, it's so tricky, because at the same time, like, I feel like in my case scenario, it was a very good send off from Cape Town. The contract, would say in inverted commas, that we have between the two of us, because I've also realized with my older age, it is more of a I wouldn't say like compromise, but it's a team effort of constantly checking in and talking about it. So we kicked off on a very good note, but I know that this is just the beginning of our journey. Like, we can have this chat in a year's time, or in 2 years' time. So I suppose also, what else, like, what should we be seeking, like therapy or external sort of advice, or going through this? Because if I think about it, there are definitely going to be times, and we can chat about this as well, is going into a new phase of our life. If we were, for instance, to be fortunate in having kids, and I become a mom, and now I'm in a way different situation, because I'm stimulated by my work and the time I have, but now a lot of that time is being spent on, being a mother. I suppose that's where I'm, definitely going to have to, I suppose what I was going to say is it's just this constant working at, not just you made the sacrifice to make a move for your partner, but it's going to be something that's going to constantly come up, and it shouldn't come up in a negative way necessarily. It should come up in a conversation and reassess it. And I think in the back of my mind, which has given me peace of mind, has been that Rocco said to me, you know what, if it doesn't work out, we can always come back. Like, I promise you, if it doesn't, just having that, that sort of comfort.
Yeah, the comfort in the non-permanence of it all.
Yeah, because that's the other thing, there was so much of the decisions in the past were made from a fear-based sort of perspective. If I look at Mumwell, feels like I was there for years. I was there on the dot for a year. And if someone had told me that, obviously beforehand, I think I tackled it pretty well, or managed pretty well. But if someone had told me that, I wouldn't have had a couple of the meltdowns that I had. And there were some ugly moments of like Rocco coming back, to me being alone 2 weekends in a row, because one was a cycle sort of thing that he had, and I can't remember, the other one may have been work, and I was like broken. And that's where it was that fragile state of being like, almost throwing it back in your face, like, we're here for you. You've brought me here. I'm away from my support system and my network. And if someone had told me it was only going to be a year, those meltdowns wouldn't have necessarily happened. You would have just embraced every moment of it, just knowing it's temporary.
Yeah. And I think that vulnerability is really important, and that honest communication when those moments come up that are really challenging. And I think, feelings of resentment are sort of one thing, but acting out in resentment's another. And perhaps those feelings do surface, which isn't, bad or punishable, but rather, hey, these feelings are coming up for me, and I want to explore those with you. And I'm just going to be honest and vulnerable and open with you that these are coming up, which suggests, I need to have a look at that and perhaps do something different. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of pressure that both partner A and partner B put on themselves when making a sacrifice. And perhaps partner A is thinking, okay, well, I better not fuck this up because we've moved our whole lives for this. Or we've taken on this opportunity or whatever it might look like. And partner B is thinking, okay, well, I've got to stick this through. I can't show that I'm unhappy. I can't show that I'm feeling resentful. I can't show that this is tough. And I think we've got to shake some of those pressures that we put on ourselves, that actually this is a new opportunity for both of us. This is new challenges, but new excitement. This is a risk, and sort of any and all feelings that come up for us are valid and sort of worthy of exploration. So I think one of the things there is just being brutally honest, raw and vulnerable with our partner on this journey. I think another piece there that we can do is sort of a value check-in. And I think our values and goals, they can change and they can shift, and they're allowed to, but to check in with one another. Are they still the same? Are they looking different? What are yours looking like? What are mine looking like? And that sort of can make that transition a little smoother. If one values finances and sort of making decisions for monetary gain and sort of stability and security, and the other partner doesn't really have that same value, perhaps their value is more social, friendship based, we're going to see, more difficult conversations come up. Whereas if the top value, for example, is the same, maybe those transitions are a bit smoother. And it's not saying one's right and one's wrong, but it is suggesting that communication needs to be constant in checking in with those values.
Oh my gosh, yes. We've already, we try, again, this is just a situation we're in pre-kids, is we're able to set aside time for the two of us. And one of the things that we've said is, like, when we do date nights, we try to do it quite regularly. And one of those date nights, we want to talk about finance, which is always like, I used to absolutely hates talking about like money and finance, especially in a relationship, because again, I was in a previous sort of situation or relationship where it is never an easy conversation, but we didn't see eye to eye a lot, whereas Rocco and I suppose our values are a lot more similar, but like just that regular check-in and talking about finances just brings things back as a reminder as to why we're here. I'm not saying the move was just financial. 100%. It's been very beneficial in making this move for our future sort of family finances and being comfortable. But at the same time, the exposure for his role, his opportunity and work is also means that, going back in the future, he could sort of take this new skill set elsewhere, whether, he at one point wants to work for himself or advance more in his career. There are other benefits. But yeah, so that's the one thing is with our check-ins, we try and have that just financial chat and have become way more comfortable in talking about it and being less emotionally attached to talking money. I think there's also, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate when talking about money in a relationship, like, I don't want to ever feel inferior. I don't want to ever feel that like my husband is covering more expenses than I am. And that's things that I have to get used to, because if I want to take on a role as a mother and I want to, make certain adjustments to my work and my income, someone else is going to have to step up. So it's a hard conversation to have, but it's good practice having these chats around finance and making that time, I suppose. But when you were saying the constant communication and check-in, my like ego in the back, or like the little voice in the back of my head is just going, it's so tricky to have raw and honest conversation without the emotion coming across as attack. Like, you have to time those conversations so well. Like, there've been times that I know I'm going to be nasty if we chat about something when I'm in a certain state or premenstrual, whatever it may be, that I know I can't tackle that conversation. So I think also as regular as you must have those conversations, maybe one must also just be mindful when you're having, like, don't have them intoxicated, for instance.
I think it's so incredible that you're already having those conversations. And I think that when I know I can relate, and sort of, I think many others, when we take on difficult conversations for the first time in a difficult situation, they're that much more difficult. How many times can we say difficult? Whereas when we've already practiced having those difficult conversations beforehand, that dialogue is already there. So I think it's incredible that the two of you are already preempting, if this happens in our lives, how would we handle it? When becoming parents, and I think to have that dialogue already pre-children is really setting up for an incredible communication that's already existent, rather than babies here and, oh, we should maybe talk about how we're going to afford this, for example, or to have those conversations pre-children, I think is an incredible thing that you guys are doing.
Yeah, I suppose that's one step in the right direction. Communication. We got a whole especially when I was going through a lot of that growth period, 29 to 30. I wanted to figure everything out, and I want to figure things out in a new relationship so that it doesn't happen again. And obviously, that's not how things work. So I know we've still got a whole bunch of challenges ahead, but the communication on the finance side, I'm also there again. I'm also proud of myself because I've never used to be very good in those conversations. And it's definitely things that have stemmed from my youth, or feeling, as much as I'm a people's pleaser, on the same time, I want to be, independent and don't tell me what to do, sort of thing. So that's, talking about finances is definitely a challenging one, but also, I like how you phrase it, that once you've had that sort of dialogue, it's there, you know how to approach it. In fact, when I do approach it often, that little voice in my head just goes like, don't react, don't be emotional. Like, you're not going to get the outcome that you want if you react. I have to calm my Italian internal emotions down.
Yeah. And I think sort of there's that situation in all relationships, is that the need for that communication. And I can definitely relate to it in my own personal situation. And I think many parents do, in sort of who's taking on what role, who's taking on what responsibility, and having those communications, those conversations before our resent meter climbs. And so that communications happen before I sterilized all the bottles for the whole week. You've done it once, and we can find ourselves in those more immature tit for tat moments if we haven't had the conversations prior.
Yeah, I do everything in the house. I mean, there's certain things that have come up, and then either myself or Rocco will look at the other person and be like, just don't go there. Just don't, just don't start that. But it's so hard when two things that I find really help in my relationship is getting enough sleep and being cautious of stimulants like alcohol that can just spiral my hormones from a weekend or a holiday to coming back to just the spiral of mood and emotions that I can't quite manage as effectively. So yeah, it's interesting, as we get older, we're more aware of these things. But just to touch on where I was and why I feel like I'm in a much more mature space. There are obviously a lot of things that I do that still is very immature, and say the wrong things to my partner, and do build up sort of, that little bit of jealousy or a little bit of resentment that comes up. But I'm now able to acknowledge it, whereas when I was younger and I did the move in a previous relationship, I properly just never thought about my own happiness, because my partner's happiness made me happy. And I really went into my career years, or after varsity, having the whole outlook, like, I don't want to be a businesswoman. I don't want to thrive in like the world of business. I want to be happy and have a family. Like, that was my goal. And then things just turned out a hell of a difference, and started a business at 25. And I've changed from this submissive, shy young girl to this more independent, finding self-fulfillment of growth and finding this love for businesses and startups at a very young age. And then things just changed so drastically, and I went through a divorce because the relationship no longer was we didn't play the same roles as I did as a 19-year-old in a relationship as when I was 29. And of course, we hear it all the time, you grow together or you grow apart, and it's not it's not going to last. And that was my scenario. So having learned from those mistakes the hard way, and I think a key part of it was just not putting myself first. I just prolonged the inevitable, that by putting someone else first the whole time, boom, what happens? Like, failed marriage and putting a lot of other people through pain. Like, the irony of me trying to please, and from this age of 19, 10 years later, 10 or 11 years later in a relationship, I ended up bombing and hurting everyone else around me by not having that, I suppose, self-awareness at a young age.
Yeah, and sort of the self-fulfilling prophecy of it all. And we see, when if we're somebody that perhaps is higher on the agreeableness score, or who perhaps has more of an anxious attachment, perhaps low self-esteem, or more people-pleasing tendencies, that we might overcompensate and say yes to everything, and focus our sort of importance on others rather than self, out of fear a lot of the times. But what then happens is sort of a lack of self-growth, or not reaching our goals, or resentment, feeling unfulfilled, undervalued, underappreciated, and what we originally did as an act of to keep the relationship together turns out being what actually ends the relationship, because we didn't prioritize self and really sort of nurture our own needs, our own desires, our own happiness, and we really create what like you said was possibly inevitable.
Yeah, how crazy, hey? It's so, it's such a hard thing also to teach. It's like you almost have to go through, I suppose that's where families can also encourage that with your kids, I suppose. I don't know. I suppose I don't have to go into too much detail of my upbringing. I had a really good upbringing, very loving parents. But yeah, it's not necessarily household. There's definitely things that happened throughout my life that made me even I don't enjoy taking the submissive role and the role of being and being in codependent relationships. And in that note, it was funny to just see that relationships, like romantic relationships aside, I have these repetitive patterns of taking that role on in relationships, friendships, business partnerships, etc. And it all came sort of to my realization only at the age of 29. So it took a long time to get there for me.
And sort of that's so much the truth in any growth or healing, that it's not linear, and there's not a certain cutoff date that we have to reach each milestone, but rather that it's a continuous process of learning, of awareness, of insight, of healing, and that the work is never done. And that we continue to go through those places and learn more about ourselves.
Yes. And then I'm very inquisitive to know, so when I put a poll out on social media, just that we're going to be talking about this conversation, it was interesting to see how many people had actually voted and said that they in a similar situation where they've moved for their partners. someone actually reached out to me and said, like, but it's so much harder making that sacrifice when you've got kids and the work opportunity is to move abroad. So it's a little bit further than me, from Potch to Cape Town. This is a scenario of like from Cape Town to the Netherlands, but now making that sacrifice for your husband's career, but you're taking 2 little ones with you. And I know that this specific person was just like, it's very new, doesn't know how to approach it, and how do you make that decision? Just in the back, like my heart just says, like, immediately the hardest part is leaving. If you've got like parents or elderly, like loved ones, like that's the hardest part, moving now, because like we said, you think it's indefinite, you don't know when you're going to be back.
Yeah, and sort of, you know, there's the sort of saying, the quote of, it takes a tribe in motherhood, and then to be sort of taken away, or making the decision to move away from your tribe, and you know, we know motherhood in isolation is not a place that anyone wants to or should have to be in. So I think for families moving, you know, it's really tough. But in those situations, hopefully, and I think that's a big part of the conversation, the sort of cost benefit analysis in making this sacrifice. What are we achieving? What are we hoping to gain? So yes, there will be losses, but what are then some of the gains? And really having a look. Obviously, each situation is so unique and different and multifaceted. But I think in terms of family dynamics, one thing that we see quite often is sort of the default parent, and sort of in a situation where you know, there's a partnership. One parent is often the default parent, the first line defense parent, the parent that takes on the majority of the child or children's physical, emotional, psychological needs. And there obviously can be 2 very active participants in the parent relationship, but one tends to be the first line defense parent, and that parent often then has a sacrifice into their career. Yes. So kids are sick, and there's going to be, if both parents are working, employed or self-employed, and kiddies are sick, there's going to be a parent that takes time off work to take care of kiddies while they're sick, or to take them to doctor's appointments and chemists to get medicine. And, you know, that time and energy has to be taken from somewhere, and often that's the default parent's work time. And sort of, so the sacrifices, I think, can be in all different parts of a partnership, of a family, and of a relationship. I think it's
it's just so tricky when it comes to that, because how do you if I had to put myself in that situation where I've got this like really fulfilling campaign that I'm absolutely so passionate about, but I have these constant interruptions by like having a colic baby, and I'm not sleeping, stressed out from being a new parent, and sitting in this situation. Your husband's going to work, like jolly off to work, packing little lunchbox, out the door, comes back, no cooking clue what's happened at home. I've had no outside sort of stimulation or support, and you're stuck in this little new parenting like hub. How do you manage that without husband coming home and wanting to rip his head off?
Again, I think we could dive into this for hours. And I think a part, it wouldn't be fair, you know, not to mention the fact that there is a very patriarchal history to motherhood, and one that I think as we grow and as society changes, we are trying to push back on. But there is a patriarchal history to motherhood in which perhaps father, if it's a heterosexual two-parent relationship, the father sort of tends to be less affected in work than mom. It's typically the mom that would take maternity leave or take time out of work for breastfeeding, and a lot of those sacrifices come from the maternal side. But I think in that example, and I'm in it, and I think so many moms are, is that work motherhood balance. And like a seesaw is very rarely, if ever, balanced. One is always going to be sort of elevated and one lower. And I think the expectation on ourselves that we can perform both perfectly needs to shift, and that, how that the efforts we do put in are enough. But I think with sort of the sacrifices to career from motherhood, there can be the resentment from dad who then comes home and whose career hasn't been affected. But again, we can bring it back to that cost benefit analysis. And typically we see that the career that's most affected is perhaps the career with the most flexibility. If I look sort of into the moms that I work with, or moms in my social circle, friends, family, often, the parent that has more flexibility at work, or perhaps is self-employed, they tend to take the step back and take care of, for example, sick children, because work is more accommodating. And I think, again, sort of the importance of communication there, that, for example, mom has been juggling some work emails and taking care of sick children, and perhaps it has to be that way. Perhaps logically, that's the way that the income works in the family, and that's the way it's going to have to work. But then when dad comes home, to have the open, honest dialogue of, this is really tough. I'm finding this juggle immensely difficult and I need some support. And maybe that support looks like, can you put the kids to bed this evening? I'm going to go have a bath, or I'm going to journal, I'm going out, I'm going for a walk, whatever it might look like. Or perhaps on the weekend for 2 hours, I'm going to have a nap. I really need it. These are my needs, and I need sort of that support. So I think, again, coming down to the vulnerable, honest communication in sharing what needs are being met, what needs aren't being met. And when we can have those conversations, we're less likely to build up the resentment or the feeling of being undervalued or underappreciated.
Yeah, so the two things that have definitely stood out throughout this whole chat, like you said, and just touched on again, is the importance of communication, which I know is not a new topic to anyone, and how beneficial that is. So communication, and I'd say the other one, I really like how you brought it up, that expectation, because I mean, it relates to so many aspects of our lives and relationships. And if your husband had to come home and he had the expectation of going, well, you are taking on the role of, cleaning the household chores and looking after the kids, like that would that's where I would hoya uppercut. Like, I would get so aggressive. I just think, that is key, and it works both ways, is that expectation as well as or not having that expectation on my partner to just know things and to pick up things, which I think I often also do, is just to be like, where is the appreciation and the thank you for the dinner that I decided to start cooking at 1 o'clock today, because my work is flexible. And it's funny, it's like when you're in a bad space or feeling shitty, those things are so hard to manage, and those things are so hard to manage, and the first thing you want to do is like subconsciously make the other person feel guilty or bad, and meanwhile like yesterday, I wanted to start cooking curry at 1 o'clock in the day to take a break from work. But if, I don't get that appreciation when Rocco comes home, or the acknowledgement of what has been done at home, while still running businesses and bringing in an income, then I feel, then I completely don't feel seen or heard.
I think appreciation and acknowledgement are two really important things there, and how beneficial and incredibly valuable it can be to show that appreciation and acknowledgement, especially with sacrifices in the relationship or parenting or any sort of area is being seen, and we know how good it feels to be seen, and to try and incorporate that into our dialogue with our partner of, for example, I appreciate the hard work you're doing and the hours you're putting into work, and the efforts that you're making in your career to benefit our family. Or in another regard, I appreciate the home cooked meal, and I think that's something that's really beneficial we can incorporate into our dialogue with our partners, in the same way offering it inwards, and sort of the appreciation and acknowledgement for our own efforts, and that could be sort of at the end of the day, the middle of the day, talking to ourselves and really fostering that relationship, especially when there's change to our career, our dynamic, and we're in sort of an uncertain space, to bring that affirmation inwards. And, taking care of the kids and balancing work has been a really tough feat today, and I'm exhausted and I'm tired, but I'm really proud of myself. Or, I'm struggling, but that's okay. It's a really tough season I'm in. Or, what needs of mine haven't been met? Can I bring those in? I'm going to do this for myself today, and really sort of bringing that appreciation and that acknowledgement, external and internal.
It's so interesting that you mention it, because like a word proud is not something that I often use, but already in our chat today, I think I said I'm proud of myself twice. And then also just at home, I've also done that approach. Instead of, when Rocco comes home, instead of going like, oh my gosh, I did this today, I hung up the washing and I cleaned the whole house, and the dog did this, which I did, and I, nailed it at work. It actually happened this week, when he came home, I just told him, did you notice what I did with the veggie garden? And did you notice that I did this? I'm like pretty impressed with myself. I managed to do this and this and this. And then just my tonality, and I'll even tell him, I'm not throwing it in your face. I just want to let you know, like, I'm pretty impressed. And his response immediately is so gentle and soft, and going like, shit, I really appreciate what you do at home. Like, I'm really impressed with you. Whereas other scenarios in the past has more been like, I don't know, maybe I've been premenstrual and irritable and not getting enough sleep and feeling unhealthy and yuck. And he'll come home and there'll be a little underlying dig, and the response is not a nice response that I want. It's more of it starts an argument. So it's interesting how we can actually navigate that. Not control is a bad word, but how we can semi-control how the conversation is going to go, or the dialogue, or avoid control versus avoiding a fight if it's actually in our sort of power.
And that check-in, that sort of real awareness, and how am I feeling, what's going on physically, what's going on emotionally, how am I feeling, what's happening within, and that might also, we might be looking for that external validation or sort of applause or appreciation when something is off-centered. And can we, before we go looking for that, can we check in and see if it's something that we're missing or needing to offer ourselves before we start looking for it externally?
It all just boils down to like that self-love, self-compassion, looking after your own needs at the end of the day. Because so much of it, I feel I'm a better partner currently in the environment we're in, because I don't have that city living friction, distractions impacting my emotions every day. there's less of that and more of time, like not a lot of options for us to, or not a lot of decision making that we have to make because we don't have our loved ones and our network here. And I think that feeds back into the perks of the sacrifice for this long-term gain, is that we've got this time. How do we utilize it? And as much as it's a perk because it's giving me this time for me and upskilling and trying out art classes, and I'm able to sort of navigate my emotions or regulate my emotions a lot better than pre, like last year, living in that city rush and pressure. But at the same time, having this time, like last night we were watching the last episode of Fiery Lane. How do you pronounce it? I don't know if you watched that series.
Firefly Lane.
Yes, Firefly Lane. Is that it? Yeah. We were watching that. God, couldn't quite say that. And I just was bawling my eyes out. Like, I've just got all this newfound time that those intrusive thoughts that we had a podcast episode about and spoke about, they creep up. So I no longer have the city distractions and the pressure and the people inviting us to things that we always have to constantly make decisions. But on the opposite side, it can also be dangerous to have this time and to worry and have these intrusive thoughts of like not being near loved ones. What if something happens, etc., etc. So yeah, I suppose like it just boils down to starting with you, starting with what you're giving back to you, and then the communication further within your various relationships, especially at home.
And the identifying of those needs, as sort of as and when they come up. And I think it's quite interesting, that situation when we're more idle and have less distractions, that some of those uncomfortable thoughts, and we really forced to sit with ourselves, which can be incredibly beneficial and sort of encouraged to lean into that discomfort, obviously with boundaries and balance, of course. But it's interesting that when there are less of those distractions, that some of those things surface, which suggests that maybe they need some looking at and some exploring. But I think to be aware of those needs, and whether that's in motherhood, parenting, and sort of sacrifices that are made in motherhood, or whether it's with partners in career, to check in that what are my needs and are they being met, what's missing. And like you said, maybe that is sort of more physiological in sleep or food, or maybe that's more sort of not feeling stimulated or fulfilled, but really checking in what needs are not being met. And I think at the bottom line, easier said than done, but a sacrifice can promote vulnerability and growth and cohesion with a partnership. But if it means sacrificing joy and happiness, we're treading on more challenging and perhaps dangerous waters if the sacrifice feels that it was a sacrifice of joy and happiness.
So on that note, because there's someone particularly that I'm thinking of, as you say that, if you are in that scenario and you do feel like it's been quite some time since you've made the sacrifice and things haven't been met or haven't sort of worked out, and it's not going well, and you sacrifice sort of your happiness, and you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, like what do you do in a scenario like that? So
I think, again, specifically relating to sort of romantic relationship and partnership, that with risk there's unknown, and part of that, from a positive perspective, that's where beauty and vulnerability is making a choice without knowing what the outcome will be. And it's in those spaces that so much growth happens. Like you said, we sort of make full circle, and how you started sharing your experience at the beginning of our chat and how much growth you've made. Well, a lot of that was probably born from making quite vulnerable, riskier decisions. So I think we need to sort of be careful there not to avoid anything potentially risky in case it doesn't work, because we're also going more into an unhealthy sphere that could be quite damaging. So sort of, I think just to bring attention there to the balance of that risk and sacrifice and big decisions can be a place of vulnerability and growth. But I think if a person has made a decision and feels that it's not working, just a reminder there that it's not impermanence. And I think we see it in marriage quite often, where people get married and then don't want to end a marriage out of fear of sort of looking as though they failed. And I think with any sacrifice or move or change or transition, that it's not so black and white, and to encourage to lean into that gray area of, I tried something, I was so incredibly brave, and we made this big move or this transition, and I feel as though it hasn't worked or it hasn't been beneficial, and I'm actually feeling really unhappy. My needs aren't being met, and I need to change something.
Gosh, I love that so much. I think the one thing that stands out is that we all need therapy, because it's so impossible to constantly navigate through life and make these decisions on your own, without a external perspective and opinion and someone who's not sort of related or a loved one. It's really challenging. And I know, like, I've got amazing support from family and friends, but it's not quite the same when you're on your own. Most of the time, there's a lot of external distractions and decisions that you have to make. I think, gosh, therapy is definitely something that I feel we all need, and in all kinds of different forms. Whoever you want to see, if you want to, whoever it may be. I mean, there's a lot of things that I call therapy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think sort of, therapy, of course, can be beneficial. I personally have recently embarked on a therapeutic journey of EMDR, which has been absolutely fascinating and difficult, painful, but really fulfilling, and I highly recommend. So I think, of course, there's a space for therapy. There's also a space for therapeutic activities, and I think not to blur the two, that something therapeutic isn't necessarily therapy. But sort of finding perhaps therapy is something for you, but maybe also incorporating more therapeutic activities, and whether that's journaling or exercise or walks in nature or nutritious foods or, whatever that could look like for you. But I think in a situation where a sacrifice, a compromise, a situation where you can then still find your own self-soothing, therapeutic non-negotiables to find the happiness and the joy in potentially a difficult transition.
Yes, that's you put it so well. Yes, I call a lot of things therapy, which I should be calling therapeutic exercises or outlets. But that's a biggie. I think personally, the older I get, the more I realize how beneficial walking and accessible walking is. It used to be, and it still is to a certain extent, running, but that's not something that I tend to be able to do as often as I did in my youth. And I used to overexert it a bit, like be a little bit too obsessive, which obviously isn't too healthy as well. So that energy is converted to walking, which I feel is a lot safer. I don't tend to neglect it as much.
Exactly. And I think it's those things, neglect, we can use, or again, we could interchange that with sacrifice. And I think there's certain things that I would encourage anyone not to sacrifice or not to neglect. For example, that run or that walk, those things that really help enable you to be the best version of yourself, to not sacrifice those. And I think that's something really important. And we can use the old age phrase of pouring a glass half, pouring your glass if your glass is only half full. I think I butchered that quote, but you know what I mean. And sort of when we're running on empty, we're not going to be functioning well. We're not going to be the best partner, or perhaps behaving in the best way as mom, or maybe even feeling resentful. So I think in those situations where we have to make a sacrifice, a change, a transition, to try and keep close the things that make us feel good, the things that make us feel alive, and those things that help us be the best version of ourselves.
Yeah, I love that. So be selfish and invest in therapy, bottom line. No, also, as you were talking earlier on, something that kept coming back to me is just the as this path is not a linear one, making these once you've made the sacrifice, that was not the hardest decision. Well, it's part of the hardest decision. I think what's even harder is building up the courage to have the constant conversation and reassessing and evaluating the decisions that were made that led you to where you are and making that sacrifice. And I think something that just like came up to me was also to relook at in those conversations is to bring up things that, like you have mentioned, what will make you happy now. So one thing that, this is very shallow, that I said to Rocco before the move was like, cool, I'll move, just by the way, you buy me a treadmill. And I was like, that's part of the negotiation. Still waiting for it, so I'll let you know if that happens. But it's still in the unwritten contract. And so that was something that just came to mind. And I mean, it's more than just the treadmill. It was just the fact that like walking's become therapy, and I don't always get, enough time to walk far enough as much as I want to during the day. So there's this desire to have a treadmill for various reasons, watching my sort of, whether I'm upskilling, watching courses and informative things, I can do it at home on a treadmill. But I know that sort of that's going to change, and in 4 months' time, I might want something else. And I'm not saying that it needs to be a conversation of, what do you call it, like tit for tat. But I think in those conversations, it's a nice opportunity, and it doesn't have to be something as shallow or as materialistic, I'd say, as, giving something physical. But it is a nice opportunity in those conversations to go, oh, things have sort of changed. I am in a different phase of my life of where I'm at, and, you constantly working. I don't see you as often in this environment. Like, please help me in finding something that, or like a little something that either your partner can do or you can do, or your partner can help you by taking over some chores or whatever, or giving you time, or giving you a weekend away, or whatever it may be. I think it's quite a nice opportunity in those conversations to bring up from either side, without it being tit for tat. I know that's also quite hard.
Yeah. And sort of identifying those non-negotiables, or that toolkit, or those sort of self-regulating different things. And the treadmill isn't about being the physical item of a treadmill, but it's that time to exercise, to move your body, to increase the serotonin and the dopamine, to sweat, to exercise, and I think for everyone, I agree with you 100%, to have those conversations of, whether it's your partner, your boss, your children. These are the things that I really need to function at my best, and I need to carve out time to do those things. And at times it's going to be me asking you for help, and asking you to, for example, take the children, or your partner to do the dinner, or sort of really making it a priority to fit those things in. And I think, added to that, part of our responsibility as individuals is to identify our capacity, and to refrain from shame when identifying or reaching that capacity. And that again looks different for everyone. I can for sure relate it to sort of juggling motherhood and work, being a default parent, or sacrifices for partner's career. I can sort of see it for myself in different places, but to identifying where my capacity is, and then acknowledging for myself and for others, hey, I've reached my capacity. This is about as much as I can handle. Something needs to change, because I think the not the mistake, because that gives a negative taste to it, but sort of one of the things that we do that I think is not serving us is pushing through that capacity to either prove a point or to sort of show strength. And we see that in sort of the sacrifices or transitions we make, that we've got to push through, we've got to carry on, we've got to go, and we sort of live in a society where rest or breaks is sort of not looked at always in the most positive light. But I think in a vulnerable, fragile space, transition or sacrifice, to acknowledge capacity, and wherever your capacity is, that's okay, and it deserves to be acknowledged.
Yeah, and that's so much easier, I suppose, as well, as when you have that space to think clearly, to have that clarity. Again, why meditation and time for yourself is so important, to have that, because so often we don't hear that little voice or that feeling, that gut feeling. We tend to just push through because life is a rush and there are too many other distractions and roles, as being a mother or being a certain role in a career. Like we don't hear it. We don't hear the voice, and we don't feel that like sort of gut feeling. So yeah, again, boiling down to time for ourselves, which is often so hard. But I think you've shared so many useful sort of tips and words of wisdom and little nuggets that people can take home, and yeah, will apply to their own sort of situation. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. It's such I think a fruitful topic, and one that we can all relate to in our own different ways. So hopefully there's something for everyone in whatever situation they find themselves in.
Definitely, and I've no doubt the next topic and an interesting one is going to pop up soon, and we're going to have another conversation, because I know we can dive into so much together.
I have a list already.
Okay, great. Send it to me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Hey guys, it's me again. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please can you subscribe so that you are notified as soon as new episodes drop, and share the Stream podcast with your friends and family and co-workers who are just as inquisitive as you are about learning and improving their quality of life. And then lastly, if you want more mental health and business resources, inspo and podcast recommendations, just a reminder to subscribe to my monthly Stream newsletter. No spam, just pure positive value delivered straight to your inbox.